Well, what do we propose to do about this? I mean, is this a problem? I think most people think, well, it could be. Okay, what do they suggest? Well, if China has X, we need, X times X. This is presented by Frank Miller, who's very respectable, a person who's worked and gotten awards and honors for his work on nuclear targeting and policy. And this is his view. And then there are younger people who are, in the public eye constantly. Matt Kroenig, he argues the same sort of thing. And okay, that's one take. The Rand Corporation uh, says, well, maybe we can go with conventional accurate strike. This is an Al Latter concept from R.D. Associates. He's now dead. Rods from God, kinetic rounds, might not even need explosive rounds. There's tungsten steel rods on the top of the accurate ICBM should be able to get through just about anything and destroy anything. And then there was an academic, but a very respectable study that said, well, we just have to get used to murdering people or threatening to, and we don't have to build anything. We'll be fine. I was once interrogated on this point, and someone asked me, well, how many weapons would it take to knock out Shanghai? And I said, well, I've got an answer, and I actually know the number, but I don't want to tell you. He said, why? He said, well, I know two people in Shanghai I kind of like. I mean, why would we want to take out Shanghai? It's a pretty city. I mean, I don't know. That's my prejudice. All right, but that's an argument, and then we have the Livermore study. Take a look at that. Okay, there we go. I call this a semi-official answer because there were a lot of people who were in the government or still in the government was involved with this study. And you should read it. There's a link there. China's emergence as a second nuclear peer. It's a somewhat academic piece. There's lots of footnotes. It's not your usual government publication. And I have to say, I'm kind of more inclined to go with the government publication style, which is just to make the argument, get on with it. But this one's a little academic and therefore a bit longer than it would normally be. But they made four assertions, which I think are kind of interesting. One is that the enemy, we need to target the enemy's weapons, more damage limitation, but we have to be prepared to inflict intolerable costs. They never define what that is. And I fear the worst is that, let's target innocents in large numbers. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they knew, but they did not want to say. I think that's a problem. I think you need to be very clear on what phrases like that actually mean. You can't just throw them around and walk away from them. Then they say, okay, let's hedge. We don't know what we want to do, but let's be ready to do everything. And then they suggest loading up. We have, lots of warheads stored, and let's just put them up on existing missiles in the next 24 months. Now, I'll explain why that might not be so easy. They concede that it would be technically a little difficult and might be expensive. I think it might be more than that. There could be an inadequate amount of tritium to make the old weapons do their job, or you'd have to make some real changes in the amount of tritium that are in the existing rounds. And maybe you could do that, but boy, it's pretty sporty activity. And last I checked, the acquisition culture associated with nuclear ICBMs is not the most nimble part of the system in the military. And 24 months, it's pretty stressful. Anyway, they suggest that. And then they say, well, build up the mobilization base for all the things that you need. Okay. Then it says increase the ICBM and National Command System survivability, make the ICBM more global, which I do think is pretty challenging, but probably necessary, or at least a hell of a lot harder than they are. Rely less on command-based, space-based command systems and intelligence systems and communication systems and control systems. Well, I think there's something to that, but how much you can do it, I don't know. And then this one just gets me totally wild. You have to prepare for an unconstrained environment. I don't know what that means. Sounds like, we all need to be buying war bonds now. I don't exactly know what that phrase meant, and they did not explain it. But that's the gist of their recommendation. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Well, I think the problem, there were a lot of things in the report that I thought were sound, so let's not be silly and think otherwise. But I think the idea that we can build large numbers of ICBMs quickly is going against current practice. A lot of things would have to change. I don't know. You guys know much better than I what that might mean, but looking at the pace of the current deployment, they're not going to be just to replace what we've got, which I think we got to do. I mean, these things are getting a little, they're like historical pieces now. They're 60 years old, arguably, in some respects. Certainly, the basing mode is quite old, and but we won't have our new missiles fully operational if we're told by 2036. That's a lot of time, and it's not cheap either. I mean, I suppose we're in a post-economic, post-rational policy world, so money is no object. But last I checked, there's a big fear and loathing about the deficit rising. So I don't know how this works. We seem to be schizophrenic about money. Next slide. Yeah, the submarine program, same story. Everything's slipping. You can go look these stories up. I won't burden you with them, but things are not going well. And we have new requirements for others to buy things from us, the Australians. So it's not getting easier; it's getting tougher. When I add more beyond that, holy cow, very difficult. Next slide. And then we have this rather peculiar operation, which is called the Department of Energy, which does not compete, but it does. And it's got a pretty bad track record of performance, particularly with regards to weapons activities. And here we go, GAO, Government Accountability Office, saying, well, even their objective of getting the number of pits necessary to replace what we've got by 2035, probably not going to happen. The schedule isn't reliable. The cost estimates are not very sound, blah, blah, blah. Again, lots of money, lots of time, very little competition. I might add, I don't have to tell you folks, but the competition associated with our ICBM program is not as great as maybe previous efforts were with strategic weapons. I'll just try to be diplomatic. Okay, so that kind of doesn't help. Next slide. Tritium. It looks like we're struggling to maintain the new requirements that we have. I suppose the requirements they're putting, I suspect, more tritium into the warheads so that they don't have to service them, because they have a half-life of a little over 12 years. You got to refill. But if you put more in, you don't have to go as often. So, maybe you can play around a little with that, but, that's not an easy thing to do or pleasant. And as it is, the effort to make the tritium and the TVA reactors started off pretty in a rocky way, and they had to go to a second reactor to catch up. Now, the good news is they're catching up, but that's to service what we got. If you wanted to put more weapons that have been stored, and I assume they do not have tritium in them, you may be up against some pretty severe requirements that won't be easy to meet, certainly not in the next 24 months. All right, let's go to the next slide. Well, and then meanwhile, you have to deal with the political pressures of, hey, they already are surpassing us in ICBM warheads, which if you're a politician is very annoying. Doesn't help, clear thinking. You got to do something.